Business for me was never just a job. It was something more. A family affair, something that was supposed to be passed down from generation to generation. I remember the day my father opened the company. I was still little, but even then I saw how much time and effort he put into it. His hands were always tired. His phone never went silent, but he never complained. For him, it was a dream to have his own business, to be independent. And for me, it became the universe. While the other children played in the yards, I sat in my father's office, carefully watching him take calls, negotiate, and discuss deals. He had no idea that every word he said was etched in my memory. Why do you want to be here and not with your friends? He once asked when I, a 15-year-old girl, instead of going to a party, came to the office to help him with the documents. I remember how I proudly stood up and said, "Because this is not just your business. This is our business. I want you to be as proud of me as I am proud of you." He just smiled and shook his head, but I saw his eyes soften for a moment. I really believed that I was working not just for the company, but for our family, for our future. My contribution. The years passed, and I gradually began to take on more and more responsibility. I was 20 when I first signed a contract with a client on my own. 25, when I proposed a strategy that doubled the company's income. "Is this your daughter's idea?" The partners were surprised. "Yes, she has talent," my father answered proudly. "I worked harder than anyone. I got up earlier, stayed in the office until late at night. I knew that the company would not have been able to develop so rapidly without me. But I did not complain. On the contrary, I was sure that it was worth it. I was not just an employee, I was the future of the company. I built it with my own hands. How wrong I was. Because one day my world turned upside down. I learned that everything I worked for was not meant for me. That everything I invested would belong to someone else. And this someone did not even lift a finger to deserve it. I will never forget that night. My father decided to have a family dinner at our favorite restaurant. He looked pleased, even happy, and I looked tired but proud. After all, we had just closed one of the biggest deals in our history, and I was sure that he had invited me to celebrate the success. "You have no idea how proud I am of you," he said as the waiter poured the wine into glasses. I smiled. I knew this deal would change everything. I gave it my all. I saw it, so I decided it was time to take the next step. Everyone fell silent. I felt my heart start to beat faster. I'm retiring, and it's time to hand over the reins of the company to the right hands. I held back from screaming with joy. I'd been waiting for this moment for years. My dream was about to come true. But then he said the phrase that changed my life forever. "Your brother will lead the company." I felt the world around me shake. I raised my head to make sure it was some kind of joke. But no, my father was serious. I looked at my brother. He looked shocked. "But Dad, I've never worked in a company," he stammered, as if even he himself understood how absurd it was. "So you'll learn. You'll have time to understand all the processes. We believe in you." "We?" I could barely speak. The whole family. I looked at my mother. She nodded with a smile, as if she had known about it for a long time. At that moment, something in my chest felt like it had broken. I worked tirelessly, creating strategies, negotiating with clients, doing everything to make the business thrive. But when the time came to receive my well-deserved reward, the company was given to my brother. To a brother who had never worked a day in it. To a brother who had never been interested in his father's business. To a brother who was simply born a son. "Why?" I barely managed to say. My father looked at me as if he didn't understand what the problem was. "You're a girl, my daughter. Someday you'll want to have a family, children. Business requires time, stability, courage. It's a heavy load. I want you to be happy, not to carry all this burden on yourself." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Not because I wasn't competent enough, not because I did something wrong, just because I'm a woman. But I already manage most of the processes. I know this company better than anyone. "Yes, and your brother will learn from you. He will watch you work and learn all the skills." I felt myself start to shake. I couldn't believe this was happening to me. I was waiting for someone to stand up and say, "This is a joke." That my mother would say, "This is unfair." That at least my brother would admit that this was absurd. But no, everyone was silent. I realized that for them it was already decided. And then I made my own decision. I won't beg. I won't make a scene. I will stay, but I will get revenge. And they won't even realize when everything will start to fall apart under their feet. I sat at the table, trying to digest my father's words. The wine in my glass no longer had any taste, and the noise of the restaurant became distant and muffled. My brother, the man who never came to meetings, never understood financial statements, and considered our company simply Daddy's business that brought him money? And this is his company now? How is that possible? I asked quietly, barely holding back my anger. My father took a sip of wine and replied calmly, "It's a family business, daughter. And I wanted to stay in the family." I raised my head sharply. "I'm part of this family too. Why didn't you trust me with this?" "Because you're a woman." He said it so simply, as if he were explaining something obvious. "A woman," I repeated, not believing my ears. "Yes. Someday you will get married. You will have children. Business requires dedication, time, rigidity, and decisions. You have already done a lot, but it will be difficult for you to keep all this on your shoulders." I took a breath, trying not to explode right at the table. But my brother never worked here. Father shrugged. "He will learn." I looked at my brother. He sat with his eyes down, avoiding my gaze. Even he was uncomfortable with this situation, but not so much as to refuse the offer. "Brother, tell them. Tell them that it is unfair." I tried to touch at least some of his dignity. He sighed and smiled guiltily. "Listen, I myself did not expect this. But if Father decided so, I cannot contradict him." I wanted to explode with rage. I've spent my whole life proving my worth, and he was just handed the company on a platter. "Do you even know who our main suppliers are? Have you ever negotiated a deal? Do you even realize that you now have hundreds of people reporting to you? Listen, I know you're angry, but will you help me? Will you show me how to run the company?" I was almost speechless. "So now I'm also going to be your personal consultant?" My father intervened again. "You've always been smart. And yes, I want you to support your brother. He needs to learn everything you know." I felt anger boiling inside me, but I took a deep breath. They expected me to cry. They expected me to start screaming, to make a fuss. But I decided not to give them that satisfaction. I looked at my father, then at my brother, and smiled. "Of course. I will help." My father nodded contentedly, not understanding what I meant. My mother breathed a sigh of relief. My brother relaxed his shoulders. They didn't know the main thing. I will help him, but not in the way they think. I will stay. I will wait until my brother makes his first mistake, and then the next one, and another one. I will watch him destroy what I have built for years. And when he finds himself on the edge of the abyss, I will make my move. Because I gave this company to them only for a while. Soon it will return to me, but this time forever. I returned to my office the next day as if nothing had happened. The regular employees, secretaries, managers, all were shocked by the news that had spread throughout the office since morning. They knew me as the person who managed all the processes here. And now they were telling everyone that the new director was my brother. I could see the question in their eyes, but no one dared to ask directly. Everyone was waiting for me to react. They were waiting for me to leave, but I was not going to do that. No, now my game was just beginning. My brother's first meeting with the team was his first mistake. At 10 in the morning, his first official meeting with the department heads took place. I arrived early on purpose to take a seat at the end of the hall, watching everything from the side. He entered the conference room with a confident step. Dressed in an expensive suit that his mother had clearly picked out for him, he tried to look dignified, but his eyes showed uncertainty. "Good morning, everyone. As you know, I'm running the company from today." There was silence. Some looked at each other, others nodded silently. "We work for a great company, and I'm sure that together we can make it even better." I barely held back a wry smile. "I want to make a few changes that will help us become more competitive." "Change?" I arched an eyebrow. He didn't yet understand how everything worked. But was he already going to change the company? I watched as the department heads listened attentively, but there was tension in their eyes. They were waiting for what would happen next. "The first thing we're going to do is cut the marketing budget. We're spending too much money on it." I almost laughed. I didn't even have to speak. The marketing manager, an elderly man with over 20 years of experience, looked as if he had just heard the most stupid thing he had ever heard. Should we cut the marketing budget? But that means we'll lose potential clients. My brother shrugged. It's okay. We already have enough clients. I almost stood up and said, they're here because of my work. Instead, I wrote in my notes, the first big mistake. His second idea was even better. I want to lay off some of the staff to optimize costs. This time, the room was filled with indignant voices. You want to lay off people who have been with us for years? Who will do their work? We'll lose our best specialists. I watched, silently taking notes. It took him exactly 10 minutes to turn his own employees against him. I added another item to my list. Second big mistake. His despair after his first failure. After the meeting, my brother ran into my office. What the hell was that? He sat down in the chair across from me, nervously holding his phone in his hands. I looked up, as if I didn't understand what he was talking about. What exactly? This meeting. Why was everyone against me? I paused. Because you don't know anything about business. He looked at me with irritation. Father wants me to run the company. And I will. I pretended to think. If you really want to run, I have some advice for you. Listen to your people. They've been here for years. They know more than you do. I'm not going to listen to people who don't want change. I smiled. Well, then I wish you luck. You're going to need it. He stood up angrily and walked out of my office. I looked back down at my list and added a third item. He doesn't listen to advice. That was his third big mistake. My strategy was to wait for him to ruin everything himself. They thought I would fight for the company, openly. But I wasn't going to do that. I would just wait. I would stay by his side and watch. I would collect evidence of every failure he made. I would remember every employee who was disappointed in him. And when the time came, I would make my move. This company is mine. And soon it would come back to me. I knew he was incompetent, but even I couldn't have imagined that he would start destroying the company so quickly. After our conversation, he decided to act even more decisively. He was obviously angry that his employees had questioned his ideas, and now he wanted to prove that he had the right to lead. The first thing he did was cut some of the staff. It was a disaster. His stupid decisions are starting to destroy the company. A week after our conversation, real chaos began in the corridors. Secretaries were whispering about the list of those being laid off, and the sales and marketing departments were in a panic. My brother had thrown out people who were key to the company. One of the first people he fired was Thomas, the marketing manager who had worked there for over 15 years. He was a person who knew all the business processes, was responsible for the advertising strategy, and dealt with large clients. And he was simply fired. As Thomas left the office, he gave me a look that was a mixture of disappointment and understanding. He just signed his own death warrant, he whispered to me as we passed. I nodded. I knew this was just the beginning, and I intended to use it to my advantage. The aftermath, the first problems. When I walked into my brother's office, he was sitting at his desk, grinning broadly. Did you see? I cleaned up. You just ruined the company. His smile disappeared. What do you mean? I sat down across from him and, folding my arms, looked him straight in the eye. You fired the person who was in charge of marketing and customer relations. Now someone has to do it. Who? I'll find someone new. I could barely contain my laughter. Well, let's see. The next day, the first problems began. The sales department received information that 2 of our regular customers had canceled their contracts. The finance department reported that investors were asking too many questions. And I just waited. I waited for the moment when the situation would get even worse. His decision is even more nonsense. His next step was an attempt to economy. He decided to reduce advertising costs. He completely canceled planned campaigns and refused to work with agencies. Why spend on advertising? If the product is good, people will buy it themselves. This phrase has become legendary among employees. I saw the CFO almost lose his voice. The next few weeks brought even more problems. Sales fell. The support department received complaints. And brother stubbornly continued to ignore reality. He didn't listen to anyone. I knew what he was thinking. He thought he was infallible, that his mistakes were just small things. But I saw the employees losing patience. They didn't want to work under the leadership of a person who didn't even understand how the business worked. And I knew the moment would come. My strategy was to act covertly. I couldn't openly oppose him, but I could do something else. I started to create my own network of contacts. I talked to customers who had left us. I listened to their complaints, and I memorized everything. I started to find allies among the employees, those who no longer believed in brother. If suddenly something changes, will you stay? I asked the managers I had worked with for years, and they answered, if the management changes, yes. I knew that they did not need to be convinced. They saw everything themselves, and I knew that when the moment came, they would follow me. The final straw, his conflict with key partners. One day he did something that changed everything. He met with two of our key partners, people who had invested a lot of money in the company, and he insulted them. He decided to show character and said something like, "You need our company more than we need you." The next day, these partners went out of business, and that was the beginning of the end. I knew that the situation would only get worse from now on. I knew that the moment was approaching, the moment when he would be forced to admit that he was not capable of leading. And then I'll make my move. I knew the company wouldn't last long under his leadership, but even I couldn't have imagined that he would start his downfall so quickly. His lack of professionalism, vanity, and self-confidence were creating a perfect storm that was bringing about collapse. And I decided to accelerate this process. His ignorance is a disaster for the business. Within a few weeks of his appointment, the company was in chaos. 1. He raised prices without any market analysis. "We're a premium brand. Why are we selling at such low prices?" he declared at a meeting. The CFO tried to explain that customers might go to competitors if prices rose too sharply. But he wouldn't listen. If someone doesn't want to pay, they're not our customer. 2 weeks after the price hike, we lost 3 major partners. 2. He started firing key employees because they were getting in the way of his work. The head of logistics warned him that changes to the processes could lead to supply chain problems. The brother didn't take this as constructive criticism. He fired him. Soon the company was facing huge problems. Deliveries were delayed and customers were complaining. 3. He ruined relationships with key suppliers. The brother decided that he could pressure suppliers to give us better terms. He canceled long-term contracts, thinking that he could find cheaper suppliers. But in reality, no one wanted to work with a company run by a narcissistic amateur. When new partners raised prices even higher than before, he realized that he had made a mistake. But it was too late, and that was just the beginning of his downfall. I watched and waited for the moment. I couldn't openly intervene, but I could use the situation. I started talking to people he had fired or pushed away. I supported those who had left the company because of his stupidity. If there were a chance to work together, would you be interested? I asked them, and most of them answered, "I'll wait for your call." I knew they remembered me as a professional, and I knew that when the time came, they would be on my side. Financial chaos and the first serious losses. After 3 months of his leadership, the company began to lose profits. Budgets were squandered on unnecessary projects. Accounting could barely cope with the chaos in finances, and clients gradually began to leave. Now everyone understood that my brother was incompetent, but he still held on to power. "I just need more time. Business is hard, but I'll figure it out." No one believed him anymore. I was waiting for the moment when he would finally lose control. So I started making the next move, creating my own business. I always believed that true revenge should be cold-blooded and well-planned. My brother, unlike me, acted impulsively, without strategic thinking. His management of the company quickly turned into a disaster, and I collected every piece of evidence, every failure, every instance of his incompetence, his decisions that destroyed the company. Every day he made new mistakes. 1. He hired friends instead of professionals. I began to notice new people in the company. They were not professionals, but his friends. He created comfortable conditions for his friends, paid them high salaries, but they did absolutely nothing. These people did not understand either the market or the work of the company. When I asked the employees what the new commercial director does, they shrugged their shoulders. Nothing. He just walks around and drinks coffee. 2. Costs that did not bring profit. Instead of investing in the development of the company, He spent huge amounts of money on unnecessary things. "We need to create a new image for the company," he declared. He ordered an expensive logo redesign. He spent tens of thousands of dollars on a new office, although the old one was perfect. But he did not understand the main thing. A business does not stand on logos. 3. Loss of key clients. His ignorance began to cost the company millions. Clients who had worked with us for years were losing patience. "We can no longer do business with you. It's terrible," said one of the main partners when I met him at an informal dinner. I just smiled. "If you need a reliable partner in the future, you know where to find me." He got the hint. I collected every failure in my evidence folder. I wrote down all his bad decisions. I recorded the numbers that proved he was leading the company to collapse. I made copies of documents that confirmed the financial losses due to his incompetence. Every day his power weakened, and I waited for the moment when he would expose himself. My secret business plan. I knew I couldn't wait forever, so I started my own business. I met with former employees he had fired. I found investors who were ready to support me. I was building my empire while he was destroying his. The climax was approaching. My brother's company was already shaking like a house on sand. He didn't yet realize how close he was to falling. But I knew. I could see the fear in his eyes as he tried to gather the board of directors and explain why we had lost yet another client. His voice trembled as he spoke of the financial losses. I enjoyed it, because I knew my time would come soon. I would strike at the most painful moment, and that moment was already near. I didn't wait any longer, I acted. My brother had put himself in a situation where I could easily strike. His inability to run the company could no longer be hidden. I saw it at board meetings, when his voice trembled under the onslaught of questions. I heard it in the conversations of employees, discussing how everything was heading towards disaster. I knew that his defeat was only a matter of time, so I decided not to wait for the moment when everything would collapse. I decided to build something of my own. The first step is a team. I couldn't do it alone. I needed people who knew how to work, and I knew where to find them. The employees my brother had fired because of his stupidity were ready to come back. They knew that he was incapable of running the company, and they remembered who really made the business successful. I met them at one of the restaurants we used to frequent after big deals. "I'm starting my own company," I told them bluntly, "and I need the best." They looked at each other, and then one of them smiled. "We always knew that you were the real leader. We're with you." I got a core team, and that was just the beginning. The second step is financing. I had enough savings to start a business, but not enough to grow it quickly. I needed partners. And where is the best place to look for partners? Among those who were already losing patience with my brother's stupidity. I held several strategic meetings. One of our company's most important clients was dissatisfied. "We've been working with you for years, but now things have become terrible. He doesn't understand our market. He doesn't listen to us. We're ready to look for a new partner." I smiled. "You don't have to look any further. I am creating a company that will work the way you need it." His eyes lit up with interest. "Can you give us guarantees?" "Yes. You know that all the key processes have always been my responsibility. I have always been the one solving the problems, and I can guarantee that there will be no more problems." He nodded. "You have a deal." I got the first investors. The third step is to intercept clients. I was no longer hiding. I openly met with the partners of my brother's company. I offered them what they wanted: stability, professionalism, efficiency. And they followed me. The clients he was losing came to me. I saw him start to panic. He felt that he was losing control. But the worst was yet to come. His first attempt to stop me. One day, he called me into his office. His face was tense. "What are you doing?" he asked sharply. "I'm doing what you should have been doing from day one, building a successful business." He felt like he was losing, but he still tried to resist. "You're stealing my clients." "I'm not stealing. They're leaving. Because you've done everything you can to make them want to leave." He couldn't think of anything to say. He knew I was right, and he knew this was just the beginning. I left his office, knowing that he would soon lose everything. And the next step was to finish him off. His company was no longer a leader. When I started my business, he could still ignore me. He thought it was just a temporary project that would not have a significant impact. But now, as clients came to me one after another, he could no longer turn a blind eye to it. He was losing money. He was losing partners. And worst of all, he was losing his reputation. His company was no longer the powerful organization that my father and I had once built. It had become weak, vulnerable, and its leader was scared and confused. The first sign of crisis, the first blow he received was when one of his largest clients terminated his contract. We can no longer afford to cooperate with a company where there is no stability. He tried to convince them to stay. He promised to change his approach, to improve the conditions. But they just shook their heads. If you don't see the main problem, there's nothing we can do to help you. He didn't immediately realize that the problem was him. But when 2 more clients left the following week, he began to panic. His attempts to save the situation. He called a meeting, calling in all the department heads. I was there as a formal advisor because I was still officially registered with the company. His voice trembled as he tried to explain the situation. We need to change our strategy urgently. We need to get the clients back. His subordinates were silent. They knew that he himself had brought the company to this state. He asked one of the managers, "What can we do to stop this churn?" The manager sighed. "Maybe bring back someone who really knew how to run this business." Everyone looked at me. I was silent. I knew that he would never agree to recognize my superiority. He would try to fight until the end. But his end was already near. Financial collapse. When he lost most of his clients, financial problems arose. The company was no longer profitable and the expenses were too high. He was forced to reduce his staff. People who had admired him a year ago now hated him. His secretary whispered to me, "He comes in every morning stressed. He is afraid to open his mail because every day he receives messages about the rejection of partners." I just smiled. His fear is just the beginning. He turned to his father. When the situation became critical, he did what he did not want to do. He went to his father for help. "You have to support me. This is a family business." But even his father could no longer save him. "Son, I've already invested all my resources in you. You had a chance. But you're not going to abandon me like you abandoned her, are you?" He nodded in my direction. I saw my father's face turn pale. His eyes filled with sadness. He knew he had made a mistake. But it was too late now. And I was preparing to make my final move. My final move. I knew he had one last chance to find an investor. But what if I convinced all the potential investors that investing in his company was suicide? What if I took away not only his clients but his future? That was my next goal. I wasn't just going to win. I was going to destroy his business completely. Brother's last hope. After most of his clients left and his company's profits disappeared, my brother found himself in a critical situation. He understood that without external financing, the company would not last long. So he did what all losers who are unable to manage their own affairs do. He started looking for investors. He sent out dozens of requests, met with people, promised them a new strategy. But there was one problem. I was already ahead of him. I knew he would be looking for capital, so I contacted all potential investors in advance. And do you know what I told them? Any money invested in this business will be lost. If you want to make a profitable investment, you better talk to me. My business already looked like a stable alternative, so everyone who once wanted to cooperate with my brother now turned to me. He didn't even know that every rejected investor contacted me immediately after meeting him. The final blow, buying up assets. I knew my brother would go even further. When he realized that no one would give him money, he began to sell parts of the company to get at least some capital. This was his last hope. He thought that by selling some of the shares, he would be able to get money to save the business. But he made a huge mistake. He didn't check who was buying these assets. And I bought them. Through intermediaries, through shell companies, through third-party investors. I took every piece of his business. And when the moment of truth came, he realized that I had become the owner of his company. His shock and humiliation. When I officially received a controlling stake, he appeared in my office. His face was pale, his eyes were frightened. "You couldn't do that. This is my company." I just smiled. "No, it was my company. You were just using it temporarily." He couldn't believe it had happened. "You're not going to close it, are you? We can work together like before." That was the ultimate irony. Did he want me to help him after everything he'd done? You made your choice a year ago when you took what was rightfully mine from me. Now it's my turn to make a choice." He realized I wasn't going to save him. And then he broke down. The final humiliation. I announced the complete closure of the company. All the employees were given the opportunity to transfer to my business. Most of them agreed, and my brother was left with nothing. He lost his business, his reputation, his father's support, his friends. He was no longer the winner he thought he was. He had become what he had always been, a loser who couldn't handle what he had been given undeservedly. And me, I came out of this story stronger than ever. I didn't just regain control. I proved to everyone that true power belongs to those who have earned it. Brother left with nothing. When he lost his business, he initially tried to save face. He lied to everyone that he had temporarily left the company and that he was working on new projects. But everyone knew the truth. He didn't just lose. He had sunk the family business that I had spent years building. And he knew that everyone understood this. His friends began to turn away from him. His former partners didn't want to deal with him. But the worst was yet to come. He was left without support. Our father, who had once so blindly believed in him, finally realized that he had made a mistake. "I gave you everything, and you ruined everything," his father told him. I couldn't believe my ears. This was the first conversation where he hadn't defended his brother. His brother tried to make excuses. "It just didn't work out. I could still fix it. It wasn't the company that didn't work out. It was you who didn't do it," my father replied. I saw my brother clenching his fists, trying to control his emotions. Before, he had always felt in control. He knew that his father would always be on his side. But now he was nothing. He had lost everything he had undeservedly gained. And he had no one else to complain to. He tried to convince me. When I was about to leave, my brother rushed to me. "You won. But you won't leave me with nothing, will you?" I looked at him. Did he really think that after everything, I would lend him a helping hand? "A year ago, I stood before you with the same words, remember?" His face turned pale. He remembered that moment, when I asked my father to give me the company I was building. And he smiled then, just like I do now. But I wasn't smiling out of malice. I just knew he got what he deserved. "Live with your decisions now, brother." I turned around and left him there in the same office that had once been our home together. Nothing connected him to this place anymore. He was a nobody. What next? My brother disappeared from my life. I heard that he tried to start everything from scratch, but without experience, without reputation, without knowledge, he had no chance. I didn't regret what I had done, because it wasn't my revenge. It was justice. The first time he looked at me differently. A few weeks after my brother lost his business, my father called me. "We need to talk." His voice didn't sound like it used to. It didn't have the confidence he always had when he spoke to me. It didn't have the authority he always had in his words. This time he sounded old, tired. I agreed to meet. I didn't need anything from him. I already had everything I needed, but I wanted to hear what he had to say. I made a mistake. I came to the restaurant where we used to meet as a family back in the days when I thought I had a family. He was sitting at the table, his shoulders slumped. For the first time in his life, my father looked weak. I sat across from him. "Well, tell me, what did you want?" He took a deep breath. "I made a mistake, daughter." Those words could have changed everything if they had been spoken a year ago. "Did you just realize it now?" I didn't want to speak harshly to him, but I couldn't contain my emotions. My father looked at me and nodded. "I was blind. I thought you could handle it, and he needed a chance. I didn't see that you were the one who was building the company." I felt a wave of anger rise inside me. He spoke as if he didn't notice it. "You didn't just not see, Dad. You turned away." His eyes dropped. "I know. Can you forgive me?" I looked at him and realized that I had once dreamed of hearing those words. I wanted him to see my worth. But now, it didn't change anything anymore. Forgive me? For what? For giving my business to someone who ruined it? For leaving me alone when I needed support the most? For finally understanding the truth when it was too late? I saw his face change. He realized he had lost me as much as he had lost the business. "I know I can't turn back time, but you're my daughter. I don't want to lose you." I sighed. I no longer felt angry. Only understanding. You've already lost me, Dad. I stood up from the table, leaving him sitting there, alone with his thoughts. What next? I never looked back again. I didn't hate him. I just didn't feel anything for him anymore. I used to fight for his recognition. But now I didn't need it. I knew who I was. I knew I had achieved everything on my own. And now no one could take away what I had created. I never thought you would do this to me. A few weeks after talking to my father, I received a text from my brother. We need to talk. I stared at the screen for a long time. Did I really need to waste my time on a man who had stolen everything from me and then destroyed it all with his own hands? But something inside me made me agree. I didn't expect an apology. I didn't believe he would admit his guilt, but I was curious to see what he looked like after everything that had happened. He chose the same cafe where my father had tried to reconnect with me. I arrived a little early and sat down so that I could see him enter. When he finally appeared, I didn't recognize him. My brother had always been cocky, with a cocky smile that looked me down on me. But now, he looked broken. His eyes were empty, his shoulders were slumped, his movements were slow. He came over and sat down opposite me. I was silent, giving him a chance to start. He swallowed and finally spoke. I never thought you would do this to me. I smiled. What exactly? That I wouldn't let you destroy what I've worked so hard to build for years. His eyes flashed with anger, but he quickly looked down. I've lost everything. Are you satisfied? He asked coldly. Satisfied that you got what you deserved? Yes. He gritted his teeth. I've lost everything. Business, money, acquaintances. My father refuses to help me. He himself is now in a difficult position. And you took away my last chance. His voice trembled. It was the first time I'd seen him like this. But I felt no regret. He didn't regret what he'd done. He only regretted losing. Nobody took anything away from you. You ruined everything yourself. He laughed nervously. You know, Dad always chose me. I couldn't just say no. I leaned forward. But you could at least try to be honest. His eyes widened. Why couldn't you just accept it? Why couldn't you leave? Why did you have to prove you were better? I took a deep breath and leaned back in my chair. Because I really was better. And you knew it. And it was killing you. He was silent. And then, for the first time in a while, I saw real pain in his eyes. I have nowhere else to go. He lowered his head and whispered, I have nowhere else to go. I should feel satisfied. I should feel like I've won. But I didn't feel anything. I stood up. It's not my problem anymore. I left him sitting at the table, as shattered as his life. That was the last time we talked. I never saw him again. I left the cafe, took a breath of fresh air, and realized that it was over. I was no longer a victim of injustice. I was no longer someone to be pushed aside and stripped of everything she had created. I had won. But most importantly, I no longer felt angry. All these months, I had been driven forward by the desire to prove to them that they had made the biggest mistake of their lives. And now, they had already understood it themselves. I didn't want to waste another minute of my time on the people who had once betrayed me. I had a different life, much better than what they were offering me. My business has become something more. My business has long ceased to be just a way to prove myself right. It has become something more. It has become my pride, my strength, my new family. I built a company that didn't just make a profit, it changed people's lives. It gave jobs to those who truly deserved it. I no longer worked 20-hour days because now I could trust my team. I learned to delegate, I learned to trust. And most importantly, I learned to live. New people, new opportunities. Thanks to my success, I met completely new people, those who really respected me, who saw me not just as the daughter of the company owner, but as a strong, self-sufficient woman. I realized that I no longer needed to look back. I no longer wanted revenge. I simply wanted to enjoy what I had created. My brother and my father were somewhere in the past, along with their mistakes. They no longer had power over me. I no longer felt pain. I am free. One morning, as I sat in my office, looking at a new project, I realized, I am free. My name now meant more than just my father's last name. I had created my own story, and in that story there was no longer any room for traitors. I smiled, closed my eyes, and simply enjoyed the moment. It was my victory, and now I could move forward.